Okay, hi guys. So today we're going to be looking at plant teams because I've got Druvis and now I feel like I finally have all of the tools in my system under my belt to bring this to you. We've done a guide for teams, for mineral teams, we've done it for star teams, we've done it for beast teams, and now it's plant's turn. So look, plant teams are really interesting, to be honest. They're really quite interesting. So there's a lot of different characters that we could kind of use, and to be honest, when I first started this, I thought maybe it's going to be a bit boring, but I actually kind of found out that plant teams are the most diverse in the game. There's so many different ways that you could play certain characters. There's a lot of there's a lot of nuance within the mechanics, especially to some of them, especially like characters like Kanjira, who, by the way, underrated. Absolutely, fully understand why people love her so much. Now let's have a look at just the plant characters and give you a bit of a breakdown if you're new to the game. If you're looking for a plant DPS, you really kind of have a few options. Primarily, you're going to be looking at characters like Druvis, and you're going to be looking at characters like Jessica. Jessica is your main poison DPS. This is the character that you're going to be looking at that does, at the moment, as of like 1.6, she is the highest damage dealing DPS character for the plant element. If you don't really have either of these two, if you don't have Druvis, if you don't have Jessica, you do have other options. They're just not as good. So in terms of that, you could also use characters like Satsuki as a substitute DPS, but also Satsuki really works well in partnership with Druvis. But if you don't, Satsuki is a great 5-star DPS. I actually have a video on her as well if you want to know how to get the most out of your Satsuki. In terms of other DPS characters, I know a lot of people have got Bacorn Bloom. She's an incredible, especially if you get her to P5, her ultimate hits like a truck. What is it? Her P5 is 800% reality damage. It's a massive hit. So Bacorn Bloom, even though she's a support, she can actually be a pretty decent main damage dealer. And other than that, they're kind of your options. DPS in terms of plant teams is quite limited, but in terms of support, you have some of the best supports in the game with the plant species, with the plant Flatus. Arguably one of the best in the game is Bacorn Bloom, which I've already covered, but we also have Ann Lee. Ann Lee is an excellent unit. She can buff your team. She can also self-buff herself to increase the level of her incantations, and then she just does a good amount of damage as well. For someone who offers a flat 15, 20, 30% damage buff to your team, she can also do a lot of damage herself, and she doesn't really require any help. She's an incredible support that can be used across most different teams. In terms of as well as universal support, you've also got characters, of course, Bacorn Bloom, but we've also got characters like Diggers. Diggers is, I would call him like a 5-star niche shamane. He can offer your team reality defense and mental defense. Bacorn Bloom can only do reality defense down, but Diggers can do reality and mental. The difference being is Diggers offers negative stats, and he also offers nightmare, which is essentially kind of like a freeze for your enemy. So he's much more defense based versus Bacorn Bloom that's more offensive, if that makes sense. But he's a great universal support you could slot into a lot of different teams. As well, someone who has another good set of skills, who I slept on for so long, is Kanjira. Kanjira has quite a confusing kit, but actually sounds confusing, but it's actually quite easy. Essentially, each round she's going to buff herself in some way. Round 1, she'll buff herself, she'll buff the incantation that applies poison. So Kanjira is great for poison teams. She's great for if you're only going to be using poison teams, right? So she's great for Jessica. Round 1, she'll buff the poison, so she applies more poison. Round 2, she'll apply confusion, which is great as a universal support for crit teams. So she can Kanjira is kind of the queen of negative stats. if you kind of think of this whole element of plant being the neg stat enablers, and then her ultimate, she just does a good amount of damage. So Kenjira is another 5-star that you kind of could universally slot into a lot of teams for support. And someone that I think everyone completely underrates is Zima. Zima is basically the 4-star version of An Li. He offers a flat damage dealt buff that goes up to 25% versus An's 30%, but the big thing here is he offers damage heal plus. So he can actually help kind of lower tier healers like Decay or La Source. He can actually help them to heal more. He can also buff characters like Druvis, characters that heal very small amounts, but he can kind of buff it a little bit more. On top of that, he can offer silence, which is great, and he can also offer seal, which means no ultimates for your enemies. So Zima's a really good universal support as well, and he's a 4-star, so it's very easy for him to be P5. Of course, we all get Eagle. Eagle is one of the free characters in the game that you get, and you will also get you'll get incentivized to build them. She's really great, but she's really squishy. So she's a crit carry for the plant Aflata, so she's a bit of a strange one, but she works really well with Kenjira because, you know, plant, crit. But what I want to talk about here is actually La Source. La Source is a 3-star healer. She can reduce Moxie for the enemy by 5. So she's a really great universal support. However, she's a 3-star, so she's incredibly squishy. Even my own, I've got her at Resonant 8, but she's still very squishy, and you will not be getting much damage from her at all. You are just going to be seeing she heals, and she can help with Moxie down for the enemies. But La Source is a great universal healer. The only other healer that this Aflatus has is Sotheby, who minus P5, don't ask about that. But Sotheby is a really okay healer. Like, she's not great. She kind of works on she'll set up the heal, and then it'll be slow healing the next round and then the next round. So she's really a healer that takes a lot of getting used to. She takes a lot of practice to kind of set up her heals, and she's not the best sustain, but she also does a good amount of damage, and she's great at applying poison. So I guess moving forward, we have a few different team archetypes that we're going to look at next. You've kind of got 2 main routes. You can slot plant team members into other teams with other DPS characters. You've got the supports there that'll do that. Or if you want to run a plant DPS team, you're going to go down the poison route. Very rarely will you be looking for crit with plant Aflatus. It's not really where we're going. Resonant builds should be looking at attack. That's getting a little bit too complicated, especially if you're new. Let's get into some teams. I lost my own tongue there. Let's get into some teams and see some of my favorites. And at the end, we're going to be looking at how you can kind of mix and match. We'll start with mono teams to see as much plant as possible, and then we're going to mix slowly into sharing is caring mixed Aflatus teams. And again, thank you so much. Let's get into it. Don't know why I said thank you. It's still the start of the video. Okay, so for the first team, we're going to be looking at a Druvis team. This is using Druvis as the carry. Honestly, Satsuki is her best partner to kind of pair with her. Druvis does offer some healing for her kit, damage heal for her allies, and you could also equip her to be more of a healer as well, but we're looking at DPS here. In teams of 3, I really enjoy using Kenjira. Not only does Kenjira offer negative stats, which means that you can make your Druvis more offensive with a side tube like Blasphema of the Night, but also it allows for some extra possible crits from your Druvis, especially if she's really heavily invested. Satsuki is there because Druvis applies Petrify, which is an excellent sustain. It essentially petrifies the enemy. Satsuki is the only other character currently in the game at the moment that can apply Petrify, and she kind of needs Druvis to really make that Petrify team work. It's really strong and it's really fun, and it offers a lot of sustain, especially into later games. Next, we're looking at poison teams. Of course, we're using Jessica here. You could also use Rabies as a 4-star poison DPS. He's not as great. I really enjoy, people say use Buckhorn Bloom. Of course, you could use Buckhorn Bloom instead of Diggers here, but I actually prefer Diggers. Buckhorn Bloom does more damage, but I like Diggers in the sense that he offers sustain, in the sense of his ultimate can essentially inflict nightmare and freeze the enemies as well, and he also gives three rounds of shielding at the start of the battle, which allows Sotheby, who is the excellent plant poison healer that really works well with Jessica, he kind of enables Sotheby to focus on applying the poison so that Jessica can do higher damage and less focus on actually healing. So I feel like this team is what I would recommend more, but of course you could use Buckhorn Bloom if you don't have Diggers invested, and if you don't have Sotheby, of course you could also use La Source or any other type of healer. Just make sure Jessica gets poison. Now we're looking at 4-star DPSs. You've got two options, Rabies or Eagle. And of course we've got our queen Zima here, because Zima is excellent. He's going to help buff the lower healing of a character like La Source. He's going to buff the damage of a lower dealing damage dealer, that was weird English, like Rabies. Alternatively, like I did say, you could use Eagle as well. It's just a bit squishy, she's just a bit squishy and a little bit harder to use, especially with a whole team of 3 to 4 stars. But why am I showing you this? Because if you're just starting out the game, you're not going to have 5 stars and 6 stars invested in, plus they're expensive. This type of team, if you just want to do the early limbo stages, you want to clear the content, a team like this, investing in Rabies, investing in Eagle, it's quite good ideas for your account. And also personally, just from me to you, I really enjoy using Rabies as a 4th slot in a Jessica poison team. He does really good damage, and I don't think we should be sleeping on Rabies anymore. I feel like that's my whole point of saying this about plant teams. I slept on them and now I've learned my lesson. Now, next we're going to be looking at Eagle as an example of a crit DPS. We're using Eagle here with Kanjira because Kanjira can apply Confusion, which is basically crit enabling, and we're also using Sotheby here as the negative stat applier. In a way, you could use Eagle here to do a little bit of kind of like double dipping in here. You get the negative stat, so you could potentially run the Blasphemy of the Night side tube on a DPS like Eagle if you want to squeeze out extra damage, and at the same time you could also get the crit support from Kanjira in the form of Confusion. Admittedly, it's not that reliable and it's only every 3 rounds, but it's better than nothing. And it's a little bit of fun, to be honest. It's a different way to play Eagle, and I actually quite enjoyed it. It's just, again, the issue that Eagle is squishy as all fuck, as you can see there, but also, I will admit, my Eagle is not very well invested. I believe she's like R3, R4. Again, like I say, any DPS character, you want to get them to R10 and support R8. Now, next up, we're looking at teams that include this is where we start to vary into fun territories. We're using Druvis here with a second line of support, which is basically, I like to call my spirit characters the happy neutral. Now, Click is an excellent semi-sustained DPS. He offers some damage reduction in his kit, and so does Anenli. They're a great pair together, and they also, all 3 of these characters actually have mass ultimates. So a team like this, Druvis can heal, Druvis can do damage, and then Anenli can buff, which also helps Druvis because Druvis gets more benefit from being buffed in a positive status, and Click can do damage reduction. Overall, it's a really synergistic team, and it's a lot of fun to play, especially when you've got like onslaughts of like mobs of different enemies. You can just kind of plow right through them with mass attacks, and of course you could also use A Knight, but just less sustain there with him. Now, this is using an alternative DPS character in a planned support setup. In this way, we're using Druvis with Sweetheart, Sweetheart is a negative stat queen. Again, we're talking about Blasphema of the Night, the side tube that I highly think that you should invest into if you can. It's really great. But basically, Sweetheart and Druvis have a really good synergy in the form of negative stats and also being sustained. Druvis and Setsuki offer Petrify, which can freeze the enemy, and Sweetheart actually applies her own negative stat, but she can also offer damage reduction, selfish damage reduction just to herself. But this team is really strong, and also it's quite diverse. You could kind of slot in any DPS there, not just Sweetheart, any DPS, and you can get that done. Next, we're using up a really, really defensive team. My queen, John Titor. Now, of course, in this slot, you could use a character like Six. I don't have Six, but I'm using John Titor as well. Fight me in the comments. I like John Titor more. But this team is like the ultimate defense team. John Titor shields, and then Diggers also shields for the first 3 rounds. By the time his shield is up, then John Titor will have her shield ready. All at the same time, Druvis is there doing damage and also offering any extra damage heal. If you've got long fights, especially as using these 3 as a core for a long, hard fight, adding in a 4th slot that's a really offensive DPS, honestly of any element, you're going to have a really solid sense of sustain, especially for, you know, fights that you need that little bit of extra help for. Plus as well, I'm here to give you guys ideas of using the characters that are often not considered meta, and giving you options to play who you like. And honestly, I like these characters, and I was happy to find out that they actually work pretty well together. Plus as well, of course, John Titor buffs herself and heals herself as well, in case Druvis can't do enough. Now, looking at our next team, this is going to be kind of the showcase of putting Plant into a mixed team for Limbo 6 at the moment. We're using, of course, Druvis, and we're using Druvis here more as a healer support, and we're using Kanjira here. Now, we're using these 2 as the base for a star crit team. Blonnie is here, she loves crit, she needs to crit. So, we're using Kanjira to help apply confusion. Blonnie can also apply confusion with her own kit to support herself. But no, if you don't have Tooth Fairy, you don't need her. You've got these 2 characters, and then you've got the sustain and the sense of Druvis. Now, if Druvis isn't enough, I've also got Miss Moisson here. Miss Moisson is a decent shielder, but the big reason that I'm using her as well is Druvis applies Petrify, which freezes the enemies until they're attacked. Please note that. They are frozen until they are attacked. Okay? Now, so does Miss Moisson. Miss Moisson does not apply Petrify, but Miss Moisson does apply Freeze with her ultimate, which, like how it sounds, freezes the enemies. So as you can see in this fight, you've got so much going on. Even in this type of situation, you could even try to get your crit DPS to be using the Blasphema of the Night side tube to get a little bit more damage percent buffs to themselves. So, because of course, Kanjira applies Poison, which is a negative stat, Petrify, and Confusion, which is a negative stat. You stack enough of it, you could use it. Should you? Probably not, because it's not going to be the most reliable thing. But I do enjoy the fact that you could use plant characters rather as a base for any type of team. And of course, even slotting in another character like Miss Moisson for extra damage and for extra sustain. This particular boss, by the way, is really aggressive and applies a lot of poison to you. Like, the enemies are really, really toxic. Taste of your lips on a ride, whatever that Britney Spears reference is. But I just wanted to showcase that this team with no traditional healer can actually survive in Limbo 6, and do an incredible job at it as well and get a full 3-star clear. Even when the enemies are poisoning you and draining away your life. And again, I'm selling you Kanjira, build her, and Blessed Queen Druvis, build her as well. Now, that's kind of the end of my team showcase, team ideas, but in summary, honestly, the plant Afflatus, when I was getting ready to do this video, really impressed me with how diverse the characters are, how many different uses you could use them, and how you could use these plant characters as the base and slot in other damage dealers of different Afflatuses. Now, of course, we still have one of the strongest characters in the game, in the plant Afflatus, yet to come out in Global. I call her Hillsong, but I know that that's not her name, but I'm going to say Hillsong just for fun. But when Hillsong comes out, I believe in 1.7, 1.8, I believe, the game will have a new damage peak dealer. So expect that to happen with the plant Afflatus, but until then, this is what we have. And if you're stuck with Limbo, I hope this has helped you. If you just wanted a fun team idea, I hope this helped you. And what I want to hear from you now is say hi in the Discord and let me know in the comments below, who are your favorite plant team character members? Wow, why can I not just say favorite plant characters? And what are your favorite plant teams? How do you like to use them? And also, do you agree with me that Kanjira is really underrated, and I'm sincerely apologetic for not saying this enough? Anyway, thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.